I think when the UN provides electoral assistance based on a request from a member state, the objective is to support a credible process. That is a process that the population can see as transparent, inclusive, and that in many ways brings trust and confidence on the work of the electoral management bodies or what we call, the Electoral Commission. But I think one important issue when the UN considers the provision of electoral assistance is to examine the political context of the country in question. Because knowing what that context is will help the UN define what are the risks, the possible risks, and what are the necessary mitigating measures that the UN can recommend. I think the United Nations mission in Nepal can be a good example. First of all, the UN had an early and what I would call quiet political engagement in Nepal. And even though the UN was not involved directly in the negotiations that led to the comprehensive peace agreement between the government of Nepal and the Maoists, the UN was always present with a quiet advisory role. When the mandate was given to the UN for the mission in Nepal, the mandate was very narrow because it was just designed to support the peace process in three ways. One was supporting the process for the election of the Constituent Assembly. The second was to monitor the armies and arms. And the third was to support the monitoring of the ceasefire. In my view, there are at least three takeaways from that process. One was the early political involvement, quiet involvement, but political involvement of the UN in the situation in Nepal. Why? Because that provided institutional knowledge and also the network that the UN could go to for information, for analysis. The second point that I would say is that the National Electoral Commission, with all the problems that were faced given postponement of the elections, controversies about the electoral law, the National Electoral Commission of Nepal was able to conduct a credible election. Third point, the electoral assistance was tailored to what Nepal needed. And that's also an example because electoral assistance is not a one measure fits all. Let me focus on the high-level panel established by the Secretary General on Bangladesh. We wanted to support a credible election. We wanted to support the work of the National Electoral Commission. We wanted to encourage a climate where political freedoms were accessible. And we also wanted to ensure that the diplomatic community spoke with one voice. Our role had been prompted because violence had been a feature of elections in Bangladesh. Also, the non-acceptance of results had been a feature of Bangladesh. So that's why our message was conveying why the process needed to be transparent and credible, why the results needed to be accepted so as to avoid a winner-takes-all process that had been so common before. Also, we encourage what I would call magnanimity. That is, be magnanimous with the loser, and to extent possible, make them part of the government. I've conducted several needs assessment missions for the Electoral Assistance Division, and in at least 3 experiences, defining the risks through the needs assessment has also meant that we could suggest mitigating measures, particularly if there could be violence on election day and there would be non-acceptance of results. So what I would say is that if trust is not evident as early as when the electoral process begins, it's very likely that if no mitigating measures are taken in the process, it's very likely that the results will be contested. I would speak about the fundamental role that women, youth, and indigenous peoples have in any political process in a country, and particularly in an electoral process. And I think this goes directly to the question of inclusion and representation. An important part of that process of defining the electoral law with the issues of inclusion and wide representation would be how to achieve consensus, political consensus, on the content of the electoral law. And you need the representation of women, youth, and indigenous groups, because they can be part of holding governments accountable. And in that sense, I think the UN can play a very important role in helping the development of their organizations. Well, to me, a key lesson has always been that the UN needs to have an early and quiet political engagement in countries. And I think it's very important to find those entry points early, so that when an electoral process comes and we are asked to support, to give assistance, we already know the context, the political context. So our electoral assistance can be tailored specifically to those risks, and we can recommend how to mitigate those risks. In the end, the UN can only advise, but we should not shy away from using our extensive experience and our impartiality to push for those mechanisms that we think can lead to conflict prevention. And to me, that's early engagement, early political engagement.